So, what is the modulation and demodulation? Modulation is the process of the encoding information in the transmitted signal, while demodulation is the process of the extracting information from the transmitted signal. Many factors influence how faithfully the extracted information replicate the original input information. And let's know a brief about modulation. So, modulation is the process of converting data into radio waves by adding information to the electronic and optical carrier signal. A carrier signal is the one with the steady waveform, constant height and amplitude and frequency. How modulation works? Information can be added to the carrier by varying its amplitude, frequency, phases, polarization for the optical signal, and even quantum level phenomena like spin. Modulation is usually applied to electromagnetic signal, radio waves, laser, optics, and computer networks. Modulation can even be applied to a direct current, which can be treated as a degenerate carrier wave with a fixed amplitude and frequency, mainly by coding telegraphy and digital current. No carrier response message encoding attached device to the longer connect to remote system is called baseband modulation. Modulation can also be applied to the low frequency alternative current 50 to 60 Hz as with the power line networking. So what are the types of the modulation? There are the many common modulation method including the following: amplitude modulation, the height of and the strength of the signal carrier varied. Frequency modulation, frequency of the carrier waveform is varied to reflect the frequency of the data. Phase modulation, phase of the carrier waveform the varied to the reflect change. Polarization modulation. Now here three types of the modulation are there: amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, phase modulation. So this is the amplitude modulation, and if you like, this is the frequency modulation, phase modulation. The modulation and demodulation. So analog versus digital. Modulation scheme can be analog or digital. Analog scheme has an input wave that varies continuously like a sine wave, and the digital modulation scheme voice is sampled same ratio and then they compared the turn into the bit stream and turn it created into particular kind of waves. In short, what is the modulation and demodulation? Modulation is the process of encoding information, whereas demodulation is the process of extracting information from the transmitted signal. So what is the pulse code modulation in the computer file format? Pulse code modulation is the method for the user to represent the sampled analog signal. It is a standard form of the digital audio in the computer, compact diskette, digital telephony, other digital audio application. Frequency shifting key, FSK, is the frequency modulation scheme in the which digital information is the encoded on the carrier signal by the periodically shifting the frequency of the carrier between several discrete frequencies. What is the QPSK, quadratic phase shifting key? So quadratic phase shifting key is the form of the wave shifting. Quadratic phase shifting key is the variation of the VPSK, and it is also double sideband DSBS modulation scheme which send 2 bits of the digital information at a time, called bit. Instead of the conversion of digital bits into a series digital streams, it is the convert them into the bit pairs. This decreases the data bit rate of the half, which allows space to other users. QPSK modulator. So QPSK modulator uses a bit of splitter to multiplier with the local oscillator on the bit serial to parallel converter, and the summer circuit following the block diagram of the QPSK. As a modulator input, the message is like a signal even bits, 2 bit, 4 bit, 6 bit, and the odd bit. This is the multiplied with the same carrier to generate odd BPSK and called PSK, and even BPSK called the PSK, and the signal is anyhow phase shifted by 90 degree before being modulated. QPSK waveform has the 2 bits. Input is follow, which show the modulated result by different instance of the binary input. QPSK demodulator is the user to product demodulator circuit with local oscillator band filter to integrated circuit, that 2-bit parallel serial converter. This is the diagram for the same. Two product demodulator at the input of the demodulator. So what is the QAM? So QAM is a combination of the amplitude and phase modulation, that shift gain techniques used to transmit 9600 bits per second over the 2400 baud line. So quadrate amplitude as the same name of the family for digital modulation method. It is related family of analog modulation and a method widely used to modern telecommunication information.